My name is Friedger, and I'm a developer. I did lots of Android and some web apps, and now I did some Clarity, and I want to share with the way how I'm doing it. I'm using the Stacks transaction library, and this is what I want to show. But to get started with some smart contracts and the testnet, we need to create it. So I do git clone git at github.com Friedger, no, Blockstack, Stacks blockchain, and that will clone into a directory. And I have written down all these steps in a document. So later I show you where it is. And now we go into the Stacks blockchain, and then we do the cargo build. That takes a few minutes, but in between we can do another one for this transaction library that we want to use. It's in JavaScript. So we do a clone, git clone, git github.com blockstack stacks transactions JS. And I'm doing this, so I clone the repository because I would like to choose the branch that I want to use, because everything is in the move at the moment. So it's easier to have the source code at hand. I see that I cloned in the wrong directory, so I would like to move the Stacks transaction library to this folder, just to have it nicely next to each other. And here I check out the feature branch that allows to broadcast transactions. That's the feature I would like to use. Git feature, which one is it? Feature transaction broadcast. That's good. So let's do yarn. And in order to use this library, I link this folder as a Node module, as a JavaScript module, and then I can later in my repository for the smart contracts, I can use the linked package. So let's start with the directory with the smart contracts. I clone my own directory just to show you how it's going. So git clone git at github.com Friedger Clarity smart contracts. And that gives me the directory with the smart contract that I want to run against the testnet. I'm opening Visual Studio Code, and currently I don't see any questions on the stream, so let's continue. I open the smart.
Thank you for joining the stream. We have Friedger on, who's going to do a quick demo for us.
I'm confused. So here we go. So we have opened the directory with the smart contracts. And now let's see whether we can run the testnet. It nicely built, so we can start the testnet in the cargo run -bin blockstack up blockstack core testnet, and we use the Stacks configuration file. That's quite important because later on we want to have some stacks to test with. So this is the testnet running, and after the second transactions, I would say I'm ready to launch my own transactions. So if you have any questions so far about how I built the testnet and how I launched, feel free to post some questions. Then we continue to how I run my transactions against the testnet. So this is the transaction library. I go into the transaction library, and I thought I did yarn already, but whatsoever. Let's do yarn. Sorry. Let's check the branch. Git branch. That's a feature branch I want to be in. I do yarn. And then I do yarn link. That's the next one. Good. Here we are. Yarn link. Yarn link. And I did this before, so it's already linked to this directory. And then in our smart contracts folder, we can use the link package like this. So we do in the smart contracts yarn link, and we use Blockstack's stacks transactions. So it's using the linked package that was there before. And now we are ready to run our own smart contracts. Let's have a look at the smart contracts, like the escrow contract that I wrote. It's a contract where you can propose someone that you want to buy like a Raspberry Pi from Dan or something else on the internet. You say, hey, I'm interested in buying something from you. And I use the presentation mode here. It's better to see for you, I hope. So I deposit some money, and if both the buyer and the seller agree on the deal, then the money is paid out to the seller. It's a simple contract where the buyer deposits first and then do an accept transaction, and afterwards the buyer deposits the money, and then the seller agrees on it, and then the buyer agrees that they received the product or whatever they wanted to buy, and then the money is transferred. And I'm using JavaScript like integration test setup and escrow. This is my integration test. And here I wrote kind of a test, but it's really just a script how you run different transactions one after the other. At first, I have written keys into the JSON file, so it's easier for me to handle these. These are the keys that are generated with this Blockstack CLI. We can do this again in the testnet here. I stop the testnet and I run the CLI to generate the secret key, and this will give me some secret keys. But I did that already, and I stored them in a key JSON file like this, so that's easy. Okay, and here we go and can have a look at the contract integration test setup again. The interesting thing is the make smart contract deploy method that is part of the Stacks transaction library. So that's the package that I linked before. And then it creates a transaction, and I can broadcast this to my testnet. So previously, like in last week session, we saw how you write it to the file and then copy it into your mempool directory. But now the testnet has evolved, and you have actually you have a web interface. So you can post transaction to your node. And let's see, we can show you this, the browser. Where's the browser? Where's the browser? Where's the browser? I hope you can see the browser here. So I have my local testnet. And for example, I would like to see how much money I have, this user has. We need to start the testnet. And before we start the testnet, we put some money into the accounts that we are using. So I open the configuration file. And here we would enter new entries for the two accounts that we generated before. So I open the keys file. I use this address that is the buyer. The buyer needs a bit more money. Let's say we have 10. So oh, I forgot how much money I wanted to give them. But for the second user, let's go and say the seller, they don't need so much money, so we just give them 256 microstacks. That should be enough for one transaction. And for the well, let's be generous and have 65, 35 plus 700 is, oh, I need to calculate in the 700. Okay, so I don't know, 700. I'm using 700 in hex, and I don't know how much this is in decimal. Oh, let's do a hexadecimal converter. Sorry, I thought I remembered correctly, but I didn't. So that's 1,790, and we add 10,000, so 10000 for the price of my product that I want to buy. So this is the amount that I would like to give the buyer. Yeah, that looks good. And now we can start the testnet again. Yeah, we saved it, and we start the testnet again with our configuration file that we adjusted, and we can see here the buyer has 67,000 microstacks, and the seller has 256 microstacks. So we're good, and we can check that everyone has the right amount by querying the web interface. So here we see this is the amount that the buyer has, and the seller has 100, so 256 microstacks. Now let's launch our test. That's here. Sorry, not, what did I do here? I wanted to launch our test. So this is the test. And I set up the package JSON. So for different test scenarios, I have different scripts, and the escrow just is a mocker test that runs the script that I showed you before. So for running the escrow test, I can do, I need to yarn before. Let's get all the dependencies. And now we can do yarn escrow. And hopefully this will deploy the contract. Let's make it as big as possible. And then after it deployed, now the seller has deposited and it fails. Too bad. So let's see what went wrong. The buyer wanted to accept the transaction, the deal, but it failed, and we cannot see why it failed. So maybe we need to fix that, or we look into the log of the testnet. There we see that the smart contract was published, and then we see that the buyer accepted. What do we see? There was an issue. The seller is accepting, and there is a problem with the nonce. I think that we just restart the testnet because there was something before. So we ran twice the same thing, and now hopefully everything is working out better. And here we see the smart contract was deployed. We see a transaction that money was deposited, and that the seller was accepting the deal, and a bit later the product arrived at the buyer, and therefore the buyer accepts everything, and it looks all good. So if we check the accounts again, we see that now this seller has 100, so 65,000 microstacks, and the buyer has nothing, but he bought, or she bought, the product. So both should be happy. Looking at the contract again, I just wanted to show that you in the test scenario, I wanted to show you that you need to specify. So for one, you need to specify fee rates. So how much you want to pay for your transaction. And in addition, you have to increase the nonce for each transaction for each user. So we have a secret key for the buyer. They have their own nonce, and then for depositing and also for accepting, I've reduced the fee rate to 256. Before, to deploy the smart contract, it's a bit more expensive. So, but all the other transactions are just 256. Just for now, I use this like this. And most importantly, you have to specify post conditions. So where you say how much assets have been changed or changed owner. with your transaction. And this is if the user is depositing the money, that means the user, so the buyer, actually sends the stacks that are defined for the price, actually sends away to the escrow account. And then when the buyer accepts the deal, if they accepted that the buyer received the product, then again he has to specify that the money is moved from the contract address of the escrow contract to the seller. So this is the amount that was transferred from the escrow contract account to the seller. And that is what I want to show you for now. If you have any questions, please let me know. I just try to have a look. Any questions here? I don't see any.
Thanks for that demo, Friedger. I'm sure that if there are any questions later, or people are watching a replay of this and have any questions, the best place I'm guessing is to drop it into the Testnet channel on Discord. Is that where you'd prefer to answer questions?
Yep, that's good. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and I can include a link to that channel in the description here too for anyone who's watching a replay. But thank you so much for that helpful demo. And is there anything else that you want to mention about this?
So there's in the Clarity Smart Contract repository, there's also a file in the docs folder that describes the steps that I just demonstrated. So you can go through it again and send pull requests if something is not clear.
Great. All right, thanks, Friedger, and thank you to everyone who was on this this live stream. Looking forward to seeing everyone experiment with this themselves. See you later, everyone. Thanks, Friedger. Bye.
Bye.